Face your fears and doubts, and new worlds will open to you. Welcome to the Throttle and Roast podcast. I'm your host, Niels Meersschaert. This episode will be the first in a series of fears and frustrations that motorcyclists face. Whether you're thinking about riding, you're a brand new rider, or a long-term rider, some of these may still be affecting you, and I'll cover them along with some tips on how to mitigate them. And this first episode will be a broad base to cover some general issues, and we'll dive into more detail in these in later episodes. So no matter whether you've never ridden or you've ridden for 20 years, there's always something that bugs you or that you might fear on a bike. And if you don't face your fears, you can't overcome them. So let's dig into some of those fears motorcyclists may face. So the first I want to start with is really this fear of the unknown. It's going to fit different riders at different stages in their riding career in different ways. So if you're a brand new rider or you are just starting to think about getting a bike, there's some trepidation, there's some fear, there's some wondering that you may have about a variety of aspects of motorcycle riding. And maybe the first one is even just, how do I go about buying my first bike? It's not like buying a car. It's not like buying other things because you are used to that. You may have done that in the past with another vehicle, but a motorcycle is a different experience. There aren't as many dealerships as there are for cars. The experience of going into them is a little different. You'll see that they're really crowded in with a lot of bikes in the dealership. So it can feel very intimidating if you aren't used to it. And so there's ways in which we can tackle that. But I do want to just sort of, with this episode, really focus on what are the fears that we might think of. Now, the other one, of course, if you're a brand new rider and maybe you haven't ridden a bicycle in a long time, because there's a lot of the skills will transfer over between riding a bicycle and riding a motorcycle. Maybe there's your balance and you're worried, am I going to be able to balance this motorcycle? And compared to a bicycle, maybe you ride a bicycle on a regular basis, and most motorcycles are going to be significantly heavier than any bicycle. Even if you've got something that's maybe one of the electric pedal assist bicycles that are out there, they're maybe 30, 40 pounds, whereas a motorcycle is going to be at minimum, even if it's a small scooter, it's going to be at minimum going to be 10 times that weight. So you can have a significant increase in the weight, and that can make you wonder, am I going to be able to balance this vehicle? And the thing you have to realize is, just like a bicycle, a motorcycle is designed to be having that intrinsic balance. And so it's not something that you have to necessarily fear, but it is something that you do need to develop your skills to be successful in. And that's all part of it, is that it's a natural premise of when you have not yet done something that you're going to be a little intimidated or scared about what may be, because you start wondering all of these crazy ideas. Same thing I'd say is for a motorcycle with the clutch. Here in the United States, manual transmissions in cars, the take rate or the number of cars that are sold with a manual transmission is less than 2% of all sales. And I think the last time when I was able to get a manual transmission, my wife doesn't drive a manual transmission, so our current car is an automatic, but the cars I'd had all preceding that were all manual transmissions. But I had to wait sometimes to get the car. They didn't have them available for pickup. It was a really rare occurrence. And so many aspiring riders may have only driven an automatic, and they have no experience with a manual transmission in a car. And then you start wondering about, well, how do I deal with this on a motorcycle? How do I deal with that clutch? And it can feel a little intimidating because you start to realize, well, in a motorcycle, we're actually using our hands, each individual hand, each individual foot, all these different, movement of our body is being used simultaneously. And it can feel a little intimidating of how do I coordinate all of these? And look, in the beginning, you're going to feel and be a little awkward. It's a normal thing as you're just getting started. You're going to pop that clutch a little too quickly. You're going to be rough on the throttle. And so the bike's going to bounce back and forth, this bucking bronco sort of reaction. And that's just a normal part of it. So you will get better over time. There are obviously ways that you can do this better, which is taking like a class where you can do it in a controlled environment. They're typically done like a closed off parking lot. And they can teach you how to very smoothly and effectively manipulate that clutch to be nice and smooth. Now, if you're still intimidated by this, there are becoming more and more options on the market for a clutchless type of a bike. And if you are willing to look at a certain genre of bikes, which would be scooters, almost all scooters are currently delivered with a CVT or a constant velocity transmission. And this is, of course, a clutchless endeavor. The clutch, if you will, actually happens automatically centrifugally inside of the transmission. So you don't actually have a actual clutch lever anymore. On most bikes, they actually move one of the brake levers up to that second spot. So on my Vespa, for example, my right lever is still the normal front brake, but my left lever is now not the clutch, it's the rear brake, because there's no foot brake on my particular version of the Vespa. So there is a way that you can do that with a scooter, of course. And there are other motorcycles that actually are beginning to have the lack of a clutch. I think Honda was one of the first ones to do this. KTM and BMW now have released some new models that have basically an automated manual. So you still shift gears with your left foot, but you no longer have to worry about the clutch. So if you're really intimidated by a clutch, this can be a way to address that. And as I mentioned, that MSF class or a class of whatever makes sense in your particular region of the world is a great way to address some of these fears while giving you that practice in a controlled environment. Now, another part that you might fear as a new rider is traffic. And, if you're just getting used to the idea of even being able to manipulate the controls on a bike, now dealing with working around traffic and everything can start to feel a little overwhelming. And the big thing with traffic is the only caveat I will say where it is a little different, of course, is because you are on a smaller vehicle, other drivers tend to not be as aware of you and don't give you the leeway that you would want. So just ride very defensively and you're able to mitigate some of those traffic concerns. Another one, and I hear this quite often, is a fear of the highway or the expressway. And a bit of this is more of the speed. So I actually saw a couple of recent posts on social media of some new riders who were celebrating that they had gotten up to a higher speed. And in one example, they hit 52 miles an hour, which is not quite highway speeds yet, but they hit that on their bike on that particular day. And they were really proud of themselves, and rightfully so, because it can feel difficult to get to a higher speed. And therefore, the highway with the higher road speeds that you're going to have on the highway, typically in the US, it'll range anywhere from 55 to 65 is a pretty common range. In some parts out west, they might even have 70, even 80 mile an hour speed limits. Obviously, in Europe, it'll be about 100 kilometers, 120 kilometers an hour is pretty common for them. Getting comfortable with that speed is going to come over time. The beauty is you don't have to jump from just getting your license to immediately riding on the highway. So you can take your time of, just as that one comment I'd seen on social media of someone who was really excited about that they had gotten a little quicker. You can build it up over time. If we start to shift gears from sort of more of the new or considering riders into more of the established riders, well, there's a few things that we may fear that we have not yet experienced, that still that fear of the unknown is still going to be plaguing us in some ways, because maybe our riding career has been limited. If you always are doing just short, quick rides, less than a day, maybe like you go out for an hour or so like that. Maybe a longer ride is something that you're fearful of. How am I going to do it? What if I get too far? What if I get too tired? What if, I run into any sort of an issue? These are legitimate fears that someone may have of considering, how do I expand my horizons of what I'm doing to ride? And the biggest thing is, again, same thing. Take your time with acclimating to that over a period. So if, let's say that your longest ride had been an hour, well, try an hour and a half, try 2 hours, just try to grow it a little further as you go out. And don't be afraid if you start to get a little tired. Yeah, pull over, take a little bit of a break. It's not a big deal. No one's going to chastise you because you decided to take a break and enjoy a sight. It's a wonderful thing to do on a bike. It's in fact the beauty of a bike is that you are much more enjoying the journey rather than rushing from point A to point B. So take that time. And if it's something that you wanted to do even a longer trip, maybe like an overnight trip, unlike on a day trip, you may need to bring more supplies with you. Maybe bring a change of clothing. Maybe you have to bring some stuff for overnight. Or maybe you want to bring a cell phone charger, whatever it is that you need to bring. You're going to need to pack some more stuff. Well, what if you don't have bags? Now all this anxiety can start to come in. Oh, what do I need? What do I need? What do I need? What do I have to get on? Well, you can add all of these things on over time and just make it a little bit shorter. I've actually done full weekend trips with carrying nothing more than a backpack. It can be done. You don't need to have a massive amount of stuff with you just to go away for a weekend. It's completely feasible. So I've done that on a sport bike and just, threw a backpack on and was staying in a hotel. So all I needed was just a change of clothes. That was it. And just realize that, again, you're going to be pacing yourself. So you got to start thinking about, what are you going to do for food stops, for fuel stops? And I would encourage you to look at some of our earlier episodes where we dug into this a little bit more of, how do you plan for a trip? But ultimately, it's just recognizing that it's the same thing that you've been doing. You're just making it a little bit longer. And especially if it's your first overnight trip, well, what I might suggest is rather than saying, hey, I'm going to ride my bike for 12 hours, maybe you only ride for like 4. And that's still a good day. It's a nice day, but it gets you a little further than you would have ridden in the past. You can then do that overnight. You get used to it. And then the next time, maybe you ride for 6 hours or 8 hours, or you figure out what is the comfort level that you have and you can change it. So there's these fears of the unknown is just because you've not yet experienced it. Another one would be different road conditions. So, or styles of riding. So a great example is maybe you got yourself and you're riding along and then the road turns into a dirt road. And you're not really feeling very comfortable because now the bike is moving a little bit underneath you as it's slipping a little bit on the dirt. Well, that's going to become a little, intimidating to you if you've never done it before. Same thing of if you think of even more intentionally going onto a dirt road or even further off of the beaten path on like an ADV bike, it's still going to be that bit of an intimidation. You're going to try something you have not done before, and it can be a little fearful. So the same advice I would play is, how do you do this and just ease yourself into it? And the good thing for things like ADV bikes is that there are now a lot of ADV courses for them. So you can actually take a class, learn how to ride that big bike in non-pavement conditions and how to get used to how the bike is going to move underneath you. So you can take a class as a great way to get accommodated with it, or find some friends that ride regularly who are more patient, who can take you on a easier one to begin with. They're not going to necessarily be blasting down at high speed, so that they can go at a pace that you will feel comfortable with and just get that starting out feeling. I've heard this many times that will often say like, oh yeah, well, I've been riding for 20 years. And the problem is that if you have 1 year of experience that you've simply repeated 20 years in a row, the breadth of the experience that you have is not quite that significant. So changing out what you do is going to broaden your horizons. It's going to give you more comfort in that. And I mentioned about these different road conditions. Well, if you get used to riding on a dirt road or riding an ADV bike, for example, and let's say you're on your big Harley Cruiser, and now you hit a patch of gravel through a corner, well, you're going to have more comfort handling that because you've already done with some riding on a dirt road and you know how to manage the bike. So expanding that horizon actually can help make you a safer rider for those inadvertent situations that you may run into. And it's actually a good segue into another group that I want to talk about, which is people who've had that one bad experience. And this is holding them back from ever trying it again. You probably know someone like this too if you're an experienced rider. You've got that one person who got caught out in the rain and didn't have a rain suit with them, and now they will only ever ride if it's perfectly sunny outside and the weather has zero precipitation chance whatsoever of happening. So what happens is they don't ride all that often anymore, unless they're maybe in Southern California where it never rains. But in most parts of the world, rain is a natural occurrence that we have. So how do you manage that? Well, there's a few ways. One is maybe use a different riding suit. Maybe have a riding suit that is waterproof. Gore-Tex liners exist on a lot of jackets now, and it's a great way to handle for when you run into that rain situation rather than pulling over and putting a rain suit on top of leathers. Just wear a Gore-Tex suit and the problem is solved. Or make sure you always have that rain suit packed on your bike or in your backpack, wherever it is that you're using for storage on the bike, with you at any given time. And then there's a second thing that people will get frustrated with the rain on, which is not so much of the getting wet, but a fear of the wet roads and that all of a sudden that the bike will no longer be able to turn. And in truth, while you do lose some traction that naturally happens from having wetter roads, most modern motorcycle tires have a good amount of silica in them, which helps them in wet conditions. They've got grooves in them, which are going to displace the water. So in most rain situations, you're going to be okay. Now, if it's a deluge of rain and the road surface is flooding, very different thing, and probably pull over and just wait for it to subside a bit. But in a normal rain, most motorcycles are going to be perfectly fine. So just go a little slower just to accommodate for it. Maybe cover your brake a little bit more often than you would have before, just to anticipate that. And you'll be okay with that weather. Maybe you went out and it was beautiful. We talked about in an earlier episode of this ideal riding temperature. And you only have the jacket with you, and that's it. And now all of a sudden you're riding along, and then the temperature starts to drop. And now you're getting cold. What are you going to do? That's where your fear of, well, what happens in that? Or you ride up into the mountains, and because you get into elevation, the temperature drops naturally. Well, there's ways to accommodate for that. Just put a extra layer into your pack or even into your jacket. Like I actually love this shirt that comes from Aerostitch they sell, and it's basically this wind stopper jersey. And it actually folds up into a pocket in itself. And it's small enough that if you have a good sized pocket on a motorcycle jacket, you can just stuff it in there. And so if the weather might be volatile, or maybe I'm planning on going up into the mountains for a ride that day, I'll just stuff that into the jacket, or if I have a backpack or saddlebags, whatever, put it on there. And now I have at least a layer that I can accommodate if the temperature starts to drop. So there's ways you can mitigate this. Or if it's maybe like early in the spring, late in the fall, where maybe it even gets even colder, well, maybe bring some heated gear with you, and you don't have to turn it on as soon as you pull out of your garage, but maybe you have it available so that you can increase that as you're going along. There's ways to mitigate these fears of that one time that you got caught out in the cold. And in the cold, for me, I mean, I had one experience many, many years ago. I was riding from New York City up to Vermont, and I was on a BMW R1200R. Now, this is a fully naked motorcycle, so no fairing, no windshield, nothing whatsoever onto the bike. So you're really exposed. And I was riding up for Oktoberfest. So this is obviously in October, heading up to Vermont from New York City. And so it's about a 6-hour ride. And as I'm going through Massachusetts, getting closer and closer to my destination, the temperature is really dropping. It's getting late at night. It's pitch black, of course, because I'm in riding after work. And the temperature is dropping. I finally pull over the side of the road and just open up my saddlebags and take out like every sweatshirt I had because I was just getting so cold. And all I had at that time was just a heated vest. And that wasn't enough to temper the cold that I was starting to run into. And it ended up being that when I pulled into the parking lot for the restaurant that I was meeting my friends at, it was about 8 degrees Fahrenheit. So well below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, which of course is freezing. So for those in Celsius, this was probably like minus 10. So it was quite cold. And all I had was a heated vest. So it was just not a great experience, but that didn't keep me from riding in the cold. I just learned from that experience and then took that as something new to do. Now, another area where some people may have some fears, and I see this very commonly amongst American cruiser riders, where there's almost a fear or an avoidance of the back roads. They prefer to just ride on the highway. And this may be a few different factors that are playing into this. So, one is, of course, wildlife. So, as you get into the back roads, they're typically going to have trees on either side of the road surface, which can hide some wildlife. And maybe you had that one bad experience where a deer ran out in front of you. Maybe you collided with it, or maybe it scared you enough that you're like, I'm never riding on the back roads again. Well, look, part of the thing is this can happen even in a highway. So it's not a impossible situation. But as you get into an area where maybe you can't see so well off of there, maybe just cover your brake, maybe bring the speed down a little bit. There's ways that you can mitigate this, being aware of what you can do just to temper that fear that you had from that one moment. And this is why I really believe in you have to face your fears to a certain extent, where you have to not just go in blindly and just be like, well, I'm going to do it anyway, because that's probably a bit naive too. But you have to try to learn from your experience that was that negative experience and then say, what could I have done differently that may make this ride more successful the next time I reach that situation? Another one that you might run into in the back roads is maybe a car turning in front of you. And again, we talked about for those new riders, as a motorcyclist, we tend not to have the same visibility that a car would have. So cars are going to more likely just turn in front. They're not going to be paying attention to us. So how do we mitigate this? And maybe you've been, collided into a car in the past. Maybe it scared you again, that same situation. How do you mitigate this? Well, number one is if you see a car getting ready to turn, cover their brake, obviously, get ready to roll off the throttle a little bit, right? Get ready to do an emergency stop if you need. The other thing is keep an eye on the front wheels of the car. If they start to turn, the car is probably going to start to turn. And if they're pointed straight, then you're pretty much okay. The other thing that you can do is maybe flash your brights just to kind of, hey, give a hint, hey, I'm here. The other thing you can do, and that's more like in the moment, but what you can also do is increase your visibility. So having things that are a light colored riding jacket or a light colored helmet is going to be easier to notice than something that is dark and easy to blend into the background. This is why a lot of riders will turn to high vis, whether it's helmets or riding jackets or even a vest that they put on top of the riding jacket. The more that you can make yourself visible, the less likely you are to have a car basically violate your right of way because they will be able to see you. And we touched on a little bit with the weather and the rain, and also a little bit of those different road conditions that a established rider may be a little bit more scared of. But this is another reason why some people may avoid the back roads is maybe they hit some gravel or grass clippings in a turn and it caused the bike to lose traction. And maybe you crashed, it scared you. And I mean, I had this happen fairly early in my riding career. I was probably a year or two into it, and I was riding up in Massachusetts pretty late at night and was going out to meet some friends for dinner and was riding along this back road that was nice and twisty and curvy. And I know that road very well because it's up near a house that we have up there that I'd had since I was a kid. So we were used to the road, but I happened to hit a little bit of gravel in the corner and the bike kind of slid out a little bit on me. And yeah, it scared me in the moment. And that's the thing. It was okay to be scared in the moment. But it did push me then to go and say, okay, well, how do I mitigate that in the future? Well, I can take some classes to get comfortable with that slick area. The other thing that you can do, and this is where it's really more of a lane position adjustment that you can do, is remember, a lot of cars will tend to drip oil as they're going along. So the center of the road surface is more likely, or the center of the lane is more likely to have oil in there than the outside edges. So if you ride where the tires of the cars would normally be, you are going to be in the cleaner part of the lane. And this addresses not just the oil, but even other road contaminants. So like that gravel or those grass clippings, if the car is riding over that, they're going to clear it out of those tire paths. So the more you stay in that lane position, you're going to also be more likely to avoid having that sort of situation. Now, I mentioned how Harley riders, there, at least here in the United States, there's more of a common sense for them to avoid the back roads and stick onto the highway. Well, there may be the inverse of that, where there are some riders who maybe avoid the highway and because of a fear. Now, I tend to avoid the highway because I just find it boring, not because I'm afraid of it. And if I'm in a rush or whatever, yeah, I'll hop on the highway and ride, no big deal. I don't care, but I don't find it fun. So I choose not to because it's not fun, not because of a fear for it. And if that's your choice, that's absolutely fine. But if you're avoiding the highway because of a fear of it, and we talked a little bit about that, if maybe you don't want to go that fast, or maybe you're afraid of the big trucks that are around. Well, again, you're never going to address that fear if you don't go out and face it head on. Now, with big trucks, this can be really intimidating because they're barreling down along the highway. They may not see you so well. So again, that visibility is a big factor of what you can do. And remember, they're coming up typically behind you. So it's not like you can flash your brights because they're not the one that's the problem. It's the ones coming from behind you. So have that road awareness to know what's going on. Be checking your mirrors regularly. Adjust your lane position as you need. So sometimes even shifting your lane position can wake up a fellow driver to be aware of your position in the lane. Same thing with that. Brighter clothing, brighter helmets are going to give you better visibility for those other vehicles to notice you. Of course, we talked about speed. If you're uncomfortable at speed on your bike, well, what's causing that discomfort? Is it a mechanical problem on your bike? Maybe your bike just has a big wobble as it gets up to highway speed. Probably you should get that fixed because that's more noticeable at a high speed, but it doesn't mean that it's not there at a lower speed. Or is it really just a fear of the speed? And I've heard some riders who complain about, hey, they have, no windshield, or therefore they don't want to go on the highway because the wind is just blowing at them so much. Well, you can lean a little further forward and mitigate that wind a bit. There's ways to address this, but you have to kind of take that one bad experience and kind of put it in your sort of memories as it was a bad experience. It's just like you had a meal and maybe you had a lousy meal at this restaurant one time. And maybe it was the dish that you didn't like at that one restaurant that one time. Well, should you avoid that dish forever? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe try it in a different restaurant. Maybe it's how that particular restaurant prepared it. So think of it in that sense of one bad experience shouldn't ruin your riding experience and keep you from trying out these other things just because of that fear. The other one I want to touch on a little bit is, and this is kind of backing all of these in a lot of ways, but fundamentally everything that we're talking about of fears usually are related into confidence. And confidence is your comfort level in doing an activity, usually because of familiarity with it. So the more familiar you are with an activity, the more likely you are to be confident in your ability to negotiate that situation. Whereas, and that's why that one time and then avoiding it is going to just almost enhance the fear factor. So if you were scared of back roads because of one bad experience where a deer ran in front of you at one point, and then you avoid the back roads forever, it's like, well, then that fear just keeps getting reinforced in your mind over and over and over again. So you have to kind of face that fear in order to then gain the confidence that you would have to do this. So As I said, some Harley riders in the US stick to the highways. And I've spoken with a few of them like, well, why do you do that? Well, I don't like corners. Corners are one of my favorite things on a motorcycle. But if you have a fear of corners, you don't like that bike to get leaned over, well, then maybe address that. Maybe work on how do I improve my comfort in those corners? How do I get comfortable with leaning that bike over? And this may also fit for some newer riders who are not used to that. If you're in a car, the car pretty much lays flat as you're turning, or maybe leans out of the turn rather than into the turn. And so this different way of riding, of having to be turned and leaning into the turn, can be very feeling different than what you were used to. The other one that I've heard some riders say is, I never use the front brake because it'll lock up and then I'll lose control. Well, that's a bit of a problem because your front brake actually provides like 70% of your braking force. So if you're using your rear brake only, you're more likely to lock up the rear brake than the front brake, and you have to get comfortable with it. So it's a squeeze. So I always like to ride with just 2 fingers on the brake lever, and that's just a squeeze. You're not grabbing the brake, you're just squeezing the brake. And that can help make you feel more comfortable. Do some emergency stops, do some practice in a parking lot, and just see the braking level, see where it is. And again, I know I sound probably like a broken record, but look at a class. Take one of those advanced rider courses. If you're an established rider, take an advanced rider course and practice some of these high-speed braking maneuvers, because it's a very common fear that motorcyclists get into. Maybe we don't really get as aggressive on the bike, and therefore we're scared of actually using the brake when we need to. On the flip side, you could also have where you have slow speed maneuvering can make you nervous. Some people hate going into a parking lot because they're afraid of, well, I can't manipulate the controls and keep the bike upright when I'm going at really slow speeds. And so they feel they have to go kind of fast. So they hate maneuvering into a slow speed. Or this is probably part of the factor of why cruisers are such a popular bike in the United States, is the low seat height makes me more comfortable for when I'm going in slow speed maneuvering, because then I can just duck walk as I'm going. Again, this is a practice maneuver. The more that you get your feet up off of the ground and onto the pegs, you actually can now move the bike out underneath you, get it leaned over to help you in this turns at slow speed. It's practice. That's all this is practice. And that same thing with that low seat height. This is why some riders are like, well, I know I don't want to have a bike where I can't flat foot the bike. As though if the bike is taller and you can't put both feet down completely flat at a stop, the bike is somehow unsafe. Well, if you think of bicycles, if they're sized properly for you and set up properly for you, you cannot touch the ground flat foot with your butt on the seat. You have to get your butt off of the seat to flat foot the bike. But if you don't oftentimes do that, you might slide one leg down further and get your butt cheek off of the seat to get that 1 foot down steady. It's the same thing we can do on a motorcycle. Just you can adjust, and you don't have to be totally flat-footed to do this. And it's interrelated with that slow speed maneuvering. So if you're not comfortable with riding at slow speed with your feet on the pegs, then if you can't flat foot the bike, that's going to add more fear into that. And it's really just practice. That's all this is, and building up that confidence again. Last one I want to talk about is when you're parking your motorcycle, you might be scared of parking on a slope, and you're again going to ride around and do circles around the blocks looking for that perfectly flat surface that you can park the bike on, so that you don't have any issue of, is the bike going to fall? Is it going to lean? Is it whatever it is? I just did a coffee ride a couple of weeks ago, and I went out to Tarrytown, New York. And in Tarrytown is right on the Hudson, and it's got some hills to it. It's a pretty hilly village, if you will. And where I happened to park was on a hill. All I did was simply found the spot. I backed the bike into the spot, put the rear wheel up against the curb, leaned the bike along with the hill, and I was totally fine. It was not going to go any further over. It wasn't going to fall the other way. It was perfectly fine. So you have to just get used to that comfort level. Now, where I will say that some people will make a mistake when they park on a slope is they park head in down the slope, let's say into one of those diagonal parking spaces. And now you have to try to back the bike out of the spot. Again, just be aware of your situation. It's always better to back into a spot than to ride into it, because you have power to get out of the spot. But unless you have a reverse gear on your bike, which there aren't a lot of them, my R18 happens to have it, but it's not as common, you're not going to be able to easily maneuver that bike out. So just get used to positioning your bike. I did want to talk a lot about facing your fears. And we talked about a few of these different groupings of these fears. So you might have that fear of the unknown. It's an experience that you've never done, and therefore you're fearful of it, especially for new riders or aspiring riders. That fear of the unknown may be keeping you from trying out something that you would really, really enjoy. So give it a try. You're going to only learn from something when you give it a go and give it an experience. And if you have that experience and it was this one bad experience, don't let that keep you from ever doing it again. Now, if you have a repeated bad experience, then maybe it's just not gelling for you, and that's okay. But don't let one bad experience keep you from doing something. You still have to try it. Maybe it was just you weren't prepared for it, or maybe you hadn't trained, were in the wrong mindset that particular day. It doesn't matter. That one bad experience shouldn't keep you from doing things. And again, this all comes back up into your confidence. And confidence is really a reflection of your experience of doing a particular activity. The more often that you do that activity, the more confident you will be that when you face that situation or similar situations, that you will be okay. Build up your confidence. Now we're gonna get into more of these, of course, and really dive into a lot of these sort of different fears that we may have in later episodes. But this was really just to kind of give us a broad spectrum, touch on a few of them. The question I have for you is, what is your biggest fear about motorcycling? Share your thoughts through the text the show link in the show notes, or leave a voicemail at throttleandroast.com/voicemail. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you next week. Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, please tell a friend about the show. You can often share an episode directly from your podcast app, or you can direct them to throttleandroast.com. Word of mouth is the best way for us to grow and find new listeners, so I really appreciate your help.